Good evening, everyone. This week's Parsha is Parsha's Toldot, Tafshin Pei Aleph. Okay, so we're going to start with a thought on the beginning of the Parsha. So the pasuk reads, I'm just going to read from my screen of my regular computer here. Vayitzchak ben 40 shana. Yitzchak was 40 years old, B'kachtoi es Rivka, when he took Rivka, Bas Basul Harami, the daughter of Besual from Aram, Padan Aram, from Padan Aram, Achaz Laban Arami, the sister of Laban of Aram, Loi Isha for himself as a wife. Yitzchak prayed to Hashem, opposite his wife because she was barren. Hashem, and Hashem listened to his prayers. Rivka, his wife, became pregnant. And then the Torah tells us that she was having very, very difficult labor. Rashi has his explanation to it. And she went to ask Hashem, that's referring to, as Rashi says, Shem and Aver, the son and grandson of Noach. And the explanation was given to her. Okay. So on Pasuk Beis, verse 2, which was the first verse that we read, this is from chapter Chav Hey, chapter 25, Pasuk Chav, Pasuk, not Beis, Pasuk Chav, verse 20. The Pasuk reads that Yitzchak took Rivka, the daughter of Besuel, the sister of Laban, from Padan Aram. Rashi asks, we know that. We know that from last week's Parsha. We know who her father was. We know who her brother was. We know where she was from. Why is it being repeated here? And Rashi answers, citing a medrash, to point out the fact that although Rivka grew up with a father who was a Russian, was an evil person, she grew up with a brother who was an evil person, she grew up in a country that was full of evil people, she was completely surrounded by evil people, nonetheless, she came out clean. She did not learn from their actions, and she remained pure and righteous. And that's a tremendous point to make. The problem is, why are we making it now? Why now? Why at this point do we have to bring that out? We want to bring out, look, Yitzchak married her. If Yitzchak married her, it must be that she didn't learn from her parents' actions, from her parents, from her home's actions, from her place of living's from the place that she lived. She didn't take any negative influences from there. Yitzchak marries her. Why is it mentioning it here? What's its place here? So the Ber Yosef gives two answers. One answer that he gives is that this is actually this is connected to what we said, that after she became pregnant and she was having this very difficult labor and she wanted an explanation to it, where did she go? The pasuk says, "Vatelech lidrosh Hashem." She went to seek out God. Now, if Rivka would have followed in her father's footsteps and her brother's footsteps and her hometown's footsteps, and they wanted an answer that she was seeking, they would go to a fortune teller. They would go to a sorcerer. They would go to people who practice these kinds of, what we call black magic, whatever you want to call it. Kishuf is what it's referred to. Witchcraft, sorcery, whatever you want to call it. That's what they would do. And the Torah warns us not to go to these kinds of people. And clearly people were attracted to them. They were enticed to find out what's going on in the future or other things through these soothsayers. So when Rivka had a question like this, where she have to follow in her father's footsteps, she should have taken the influences of where she came from. She wouldn't go to Hashem. She would have gone to some kind of fortune teller. The fact that she didn't is because she didn't learn from her father. She didn't learn from her family or from her surroundings, where she came from. And therefore, it's here where the Torah stresses the idea that she didn't learn from her surroundings, which is why she did the right thing and went to ask Hashem, not fortune tellers. Now, when I saw this answer, it kind of struck me funny because of the fact that, if Rivka, merited to marry Yitzchak, she was the one that was chosen. As Eliezer, he made a sign asking Hashem to show who's the right one. Rivka was the right one, and Rivka came. if she believed in fortune tellers and sorcerers, would she have become Yitzchak's wife? We mentioned that Eliezer saw, the pasuk says that when Rivka first showed up, he ran to her. Rashi says, why did he run? Because he saw a miracle. He saw that when she went to the water rose up to her. All she had to do was fill up her jug. She didn't have to lower the jug and draw up the water. All she had to do was fill it because the water rose up for her. So do you think a person who believed in fortune tellers and sorcerers would have been a person to merit miracles like that? So this answer, it bothered me. And could be my question is a good question. What I was thinking to maybe try to answer this question is that it's true that Rivka clearly, if she had the miracles and she was chosen to be the one that would be a very holy individual, a pure individual, as the Torah last week's Parsha brings that point out. She was pure. No one ever violated her in any way. And she was very pure. And in her typical way of dealings, she was a righteous individual. But perhaps when push comes to shove, when the going gets rough, and she's searching for an answer, maybe under that kind of pressure and tension, she would revert back to what she saw by her father. She would revert back to what she saw in her city. Because as we see from different parts of the Torah, sorcery was big in Aram. Lavan was a sorcerer that we see from later on in the Torah. Bilam came from Aram, from Aram. The Bilam, the Gentile prophet, was a sorcerer. Some say Bilam and Lavan were the same person. Some say Bilam is a grandson of Lavan. So this was not something that was foreign to her. It was very much part of what she grew up in. And it could very well have been that perhaps under this kind of difficult situation, she'd revert back to that. It would almost be like something under the pressure, she'd revert back to it. And the Torah says, no, she didn't do that. Even under those circumstances, she didn't learn from her she didn't learn from her surroundings. She never took the negative influences of her family because, look, that's why she went to search out God. Then there's another answer that he gives. Very interesting answer. And I will share with you the way I understand it. There's a very interesting Gemara, very interesting saying in the Talmud, that based on this pasuk, what we read, where it says, Yitzchak dav, vayatar Yitzchak la'Hashem l'nochach ishto, where we said it means Yitzchak prayed. Vayatar is not the typical word for praying. So Rashi says, we have the word lehispalel. So Rashi says vayatar means he davened very intensely, very fervently. But the Gemara says that the word vayatar, it's in the shorish, the root of the word is ayin taf resh, atar. And atar is a pitchfork. And there's some kind of connection between a pitchfork and praying. And the Gemara says that this word, Vayeta Yitzchak, comes to teach us that when the tzaddikim pray, the same way with a pitchfork, you pick up the grain from one place of this one part of the threshing floor, or the silo, whatever it is, and you pick it up and you turn it over and put it somewhere else. The prayer of a tzaddik changes Hashem's anger to mercy. That's what Gemara says. And that's why the word vayatar is used with that word pitchfork. Because when a tzaddik prays, outlook, so to speak, that's compared to pitchfork. Now, if the whole point of the pitchfork metaphor is to say that the tzaddik's prayer changes Hashem's decisions, you need a pitchfork for that to be the metaphor for that. It just seems like a kind of a strange metaphor. Also, it says that the tzaddik's prayer changes Hashem from anger to mercy. Now, if we derive this from here, this is where we're deriving it from this story of Yitzchak praying for his wife, and the Torah uses the word vayetar, and vayetar has in the word pitchfork, we see the prayers of a righteous person are compared to a pitchfork. But how does that should have to apply here? It should have to apply here by Yitzchak and Rivka. We supposed to be praying for Rivka. And it says that the Gemara says, like the pitchfork turns over and moves the grain, the tzaddik's prayers is able to turn Hashem's decision from anger to mercy. Where is the anger here? What was Hashem angry about? If she did something wrong, she was barren. That's where she was born. Yitzchak needed to pray for a miracle that she should physically be able to have children, like that happened by Sarah. So what's the anger here? So the Rebbe Yosef explains that what it means that with the metaphor to the pitchfork is really to say, and what the anger was, is that Rivka was barren. She needed a miracle. Yitzchak was praying for a miracle. But there was something that put Rivka in a difficult situation. There was reason not to allow her to have children. And that reason was because look at her source. Look at where she comes from. She comes from evil people. That's her root. And that means that no matter what she is, she's not able necessarily to completely expel that from her, so to speak, spiritual genome. And that's going to be passed on to her children. The potential for getting the spiritual genes of their grandfather, of the evil Besuel and their uncle, and all the other influences that she did experience. Not that she lived it, but it was part of her. She grew up in the home. She was born from these people. And therefore, in essence, she really was at a disadvantage from the point of Hashem allowing her to have children, because she has some strikes against her. Look at where she comes from. Look what she passed on. A miracle to happen. A miracle to happen to possibly produce such children, such generations. But Yitzchak, in his prayer, has to now take that thing itself, that disadvantage of hers, and actually say to Hashem, don't look at it as a disadvantage. Look at it as an advantage. Yeah, she came from these evil people, but look at her. She never learned anything from them. Now, you might say, if the way we just explained it, the problem is that she's going to pass it on, because we know that she's righteous. That's not the issue, but she may still pass on this kind of spiritual corruption and purity to her generations. What is it up to say that, but look at her, she's righteous? It's just a way of saying, well, she did this, she should still, no matter what, she should still merit, because look at the tremendous thing she accomplished. She stayed pure. I would suggest that what it means is the following. The Yitzchak says to Rabbeinu Shalom, look, it's inevitable that the Jewish nation are going to be exposed to things, and people are going to find themselves in different situations under very negative influences. And you want them to have that power, like Rivka, to be able to stay pure even under those circumstances. She's going to give them that power. The power to do that is going to come from Rivka. She's going to instill in us the power to be able not to be negatively influenced. So Yitzchak takes what is a disadvantage. He takes the anger meaning. He takes he takes the negative side. He takes the evil side, which is what, so to speak, brings anger to Hashem, and turns it into mercy, turns it into, no, this is a reason to give her a miracle. Because looking at her, what she accomplished and what she was like, even under those circumstances, that's what she's going to instill in her generations. That's what she's going to instill into the Jewish people. That ability to stand strong under negative influences. That's the pitchfork metaphor. You take the grain, right? It's the same grain, and you turn it over and move it to a different place. What are you doing with the pitchfork? Is it just the way you move it? So my understanding, not that I grew up on a farm, but that part, actually the pitchfork, turning it over, is part of the way of removing the chaff that's stuck in there. You pick it up and you kind of, wave it and put it over to a different place, and that allows the chaff to fly out. So as you switch places, you actually cleanse it from the waste. That's what Yitzchak's doing for Rivka. Yitzchak is taking that negative thing, that negative that negative side of things and turning it over, switching it over to a different place, to a different perspective, and cleansing the waste, taking out, and rather saying, this is the reason she should have children. This is the reason she should have children, because that will instill in the Jewish people the strength not to be influenced, that to have the strength to stand up against negative influences. The Rebbe Yosef doesn't speak this all out. This is my addition and my understanding of his answer. And that's what it means that tzaddikim do that. Tzaddikim, when they pray to Hashem, they have to convince the Rebbeinu Shalom that instead of seeing the negative about the Jewish people, see the positive side of that. If the Jewish people aren't worthy, look at the fact that even under these conditions that they're in, and that they are unworthy, look at what they still do. I'll give you an example. This has always been an idea that fascinated me. I remember the first time I heard it, I was a teenager. It always stuck with me. And that is that, this is a famous question. We daven that Mashiach should come. The question is, previous generations, with greater people, with holy people and great people that we have no idea how great they were. We have no way of understanding their greatness. They davened for Mashiach too, and it didn't help. So our prayers are going to help. We're much smaller than them. We're spiritually much smaller than them. If Hashem didn't accept those great people's prayers, he'd accept ours. And one answer is that actually, as small as we are, we actually have something up on those previous greater generations, because we are smaller. We are. We live in a world that is not as pure and holy as the world those earlier generations lived in. It's not. It's a different world. And because of that, we fall. Because of that, we slip up. We don't grow spiritually as we should. And therefore, we are at a lower state, spiritual state than previous generations. At the same time, previous generations didn't have to deal with the world that we're in. And therefore, the fact that we produce anything in our situation is precious by Hashem. Because if under these circumstances, we still do what we do, that's precious. In the early generations, when the world was a better place to be spiritual, it was easier to be a Jew from a spiritual sense. So of course, Hashem loves Torah and mitzvahs. But, it's not, so to speak, it's not as hard to come by. But in a situation where the world is less conducive to Torah and to spirituality, and we still are able to produce so much. We're still able to do something. We're still able to produce a lot. Baruch Hashem. But whatever it is that we can do, even if it's on a smaller level, that's very precious by Hashem, because it's happening under much more difficult circumstances. Therefore, our prayers could bring Mashiach because we do have a certain merit that the previous generations don't have. We have an advantage that previous generations didn't have. Because if we can produce, even under the circumstances that we live in, then that's so precious by Hashem, a tremendous merit. So a tzaddik, that would be an example that tzaddik would say to Rebbeinu Shalom, look at the Jewish people. You say they're not worthy. I get it. They've slipped a lot. They've fallen a lot. They're not doing what they have to do. But look at what they do, even in the circumstances that they're in. That would be that's basically taking the same thing, the same pitchfork takes the same grain and turns it over. The tzaddik takes what would be negative and says, no, Rebbeinu Shalom, look at the positive of it. And that, says the Rebbe Yosef, is why here we are stressing the idea that Rivka was not influenced by her upbringing. that she didn't take the negative influences. Why are you mentioning that here? Because Rabbi Yosef wants to say that, as we just said, that this was part of Yitzchak's prayer. Part of Yitzchak's prayer to Hashem to give Rivka children was the fact that, look, she didn't learn from her parents. She didn't learn from her negative surroundings. That was part of her prayer. That was part of Yitzchak's argument to Hashem, so to speak. And therefore, here the Torah says it, brings this point out, and then it says Yitzchak prayed for his wife. There's a connection between the two. The fact that Rivka didn't learn from any negative influences, that was part of his prayer. That's why it's here. And that is what it means that the tzaddik is like the pitchfork. His prayer is like the pitchfork. Take the same thing, turn it over, move it to a different place, clean out the waste. Yitzchak did that for Rivka. The tzaddikim do that for their generation. To say to Rabbeinu Shalom, don't look at the negative side. See the positive of that same thing. The same thing that should be taken as negative, look at the positive that's there. That's how the tzaddik prays on behalf of his generation. Okay. The next thing we'll talk about, go to the other half of the parsha. Go to the other half of the parsha. The end of the parsha, the last part of the parsha, talks about how Yaakov disguised himself as Esav to take the blessings that Yitzchak wanted to give Esav. And Yaakov does his thing. The Torah says Yaakov left and Esav came, because Esav originally was sent to, bring the food. And just as Yaakov left after pretending to be Esav to get the blessings from Yitzchak, Esav showed up. And Esav shows up. He says to his father, "Arise, you should eat from the. I brought you the food to eat." And Yitzchak says, "Who are you?" And Esav says who he is. And Yitzchak realizes what happened. The Torah says, this is Perek Chav Zayin Pasuk Lamed Gimel, chapter 27, verse 33. Vayecharad Yitzchak charada gadola ad ma'od. Yitzchak trembled a very great tremble. Not just a great tremble, a very great tremble. And he said, who is the one who came before you? And I ate from his food, and I blessed him. He should be blessed. So Rashi brings down the Medrash. The Medrash says, why was Yitzchak afraid? What did he tremble about? Says he trembled. What did he tremble about? Omar, Yitzchak said, when he realized that something went wrong here, something went wrong. Yaakov took the blessings. And Yitzchak felt that Esav was supposed to get it. He was the older one. He was supposed to get it. Which means at the end of the Yitzchak saw that it came out that he did the wrong thing. Now Yitzchak didn't just say, well, he fooled me. Rather, Yitzchak says, Shema oven yeshbi. Maybe there's some kind of sin that I have. Shebeirachti katan lefnei gadol v'shenisi seder hayakas. That I blessed the younger one before the older one, and I changed the order of the lineage. Yitzchak felt if things didn't go the way they were supposed to, if that's what happened to me, if it came out that I did something wrong, what sin did I commit that this should happen to me? That's a lesson to itself. Instead of blaming it on the fact that he was fooled, he was fooled. But if I was fooled and I did the wrong thing, even though it was kind of beyond my control, those things don't happen unless I've already done something else wrong. Meaning I'm already, so to speak, in a not good place, which is why I now become the means by which this wrong thing happens. If I become the means by which the wrong thing happens, that means there's something wrong by me. Ritual fall that should cause this to happen. That should cause that I should do this thing that's wrong, even beyond my control. Now, the Medrash continues, Esav Esav cries, as the Torah says, Yaakov tricked me twice. So his father says to him, what'd he do? What'd he do? And Esav tells him, he took my firstborn. What's he referring to? Esav, it says twice he fooled me. Now, what's the twice? So the answer is that earlier in the Parsha, it says that Esav sold his firstborn right to Yaakov. So Esav now tells Yitzchak, he tricked me twice. He got me to sell the firstborn right then, and he took the blessings now. Omar, Yitzchak says when he heard that, wait, until now I was frightened that I did the wrong thing. Now I see I actually blessed the firstborn who had the firstborn right. Gam Baruch Yeh, he should be blessed. Meaning Yitzchak now realizes that he didn't do anything wrong. This was the right thing to do. Why did that happen this way? It's a separate discussion. But Yitzchak now realized I gave the bracha to the right person. So Yitzchak's fear was the fact that he did the wrong thing of giving the blessings to Yaakov. Then he realizes, no, I didn't do the wrong thing. But his original trembling was because he was afraid he did the wrong thing. Now the commentary of Das Sekanim, Ribali Taisvis, Das Sekanim brings down a different medrash. And whether this and the other medrash says like this: Shtei charadais charad Yitzchak. There are two times that Yitzchak trembled. Achas kashenekad, once when he was bound, when Avram bound him on the altar to slaughter him, he trembled. We actually find there's a medrash that says that Yitzchak told Avram, "Tie me down tight. I don't want to start." Moving around and jumping around, and that's gonna make and you won't be able to slaughter me properly. So he trembled then. V'achas kan, and here, right here, when Esav comes back in and he realizes something that things didn't go the way he thought, he trembled again. Okay, now the Medrash really is asking a question. All right, Yitzchak trembled by the Akedah. Yitzchak trembled now. Where did he tremble worse? Where did he tremble more? The fact that here it says, and Yitzchak trembled, a very great trembling, all that description, all those very great trembling means to say, here he trembled more than there. Trembled more now than when he trembled by the Akedah. Now, then the Dakedim continues, we understand that he trembled by the Akedah, he was about to lose his life. But would he tremble now? And the answer is, as Rashi brings down, he thought he did the wrong thing, that I blessed the younger one before the older one, I changed the order of the lineage. That was what he trembled about. So according to where the Das Sekanim puts this, cites this all together, it's very clear that the trembling that we say, that the Medrash says, the greater trembling they trembled now, meaning now over the trembling that he did by the Akedah, was a trembling because he thought maybe he did the wrong thing. So you know what that means at the end, putting this all together? That means that Yitzchak trembled before when thought he was about to be killed. He trembled when he thought he did something wrong, and he trembled more now. That means it bothered Yitzchak more that he did something wrong than if he'd lose his life. That's an interesting lesson, isn't it? Yitzchak trembled. He had a great mitzvah to do. Hashem wanted him to give up his life. He was ready to do it. But he trembled. It's understandable that he trembled. But he trembled more when he thought he did something wrong. Even something that happened beyond his control. But if it happened to me, it must be that there's something wrong with me. There must be some spiritual shortcoming of mine that this should happen to me. And he trembled more because of that. It bothered him more if he did something wrong than if he loses his life. That's a very high level, but that's a very important lesson. By great people, when they do something wrong, it really, really bothers them. Have a wonderful night. All the best.